Hi, and welcome back to Sadie's Spincraft. This is a spin and story time. I will be spinning a bit of the Shetland for Christopher's jumper, and then we'll be getting into plying. There'll be 4 yarns done and finished by the end of this video. I hope you enjoy the next few chapters of Poison Study by Maria V. Schneider. Chapter 24. Valak stiffened under my touch. Was he expecting me to strangle him? I wondered. As my hands kneaded his muscles, he relaxed. What would you do, I asked him, if suddenly the world was perfect and you had no one to spy on? I'd be bored, Valak said with amusement. Come on, seriously, a change in profession? I dug my thumbs into the muscles at the base of his neck. A fire dancer. A rush of warmth radiated as brandy pumped through my blood. No, an arms teacher, Valak suggested. No, it's a perfect world. No weapons allowed. I moved my hands down his back. How about a scholar? You've read all these books lying around, haven't you? Or are they just to make it difficult for someone to sneak in? Books serve me in so many ways, but I doubt your perfect society would need a scholar on murder. My hands paused for a second. No, definitely not. A sculptor. I could carve extravagant statues. We could redecorate the castle and liven things up. How about you? He asked as I pressed my fingertips into the small of his back. What would you do? Acrobatics. The word flowed without conscious thought. I had thought I left acrobatics behind with my fire amulet, but it seemed my excursion through the trees had reawakened my desire. An acrobat? Well, that explains a lot. Aroused by my contact with Valak's sculpted body, I slid my hands around to his stomach. Rayad, be damned. The brandy had relaxed me past fear. I started to unfasten Valak's pants. He grabbed my wrists, stopping me. Yelena, you're drunk. His voice was hoarse. Valak released my hands and stood. I sat, watching him with surprise as he swooped down to lift me from the couch. Wordlessly, he carried me to my room and laid me on the bed. Get some sleep, Yelena, Valak said softly. As he left the room, my world spun as I stared into the darkness. Placing a hand on the cold stone wall next to my bed helped to steady my thoughts. Now I knew. Valak had no interest in me other than my job as the food taster. I had allowed myself to get caught up in Delana's gossip and Marian's jealousy. The ache of rejection throbbed in my soul was my own fault. Throbbing in my soul was my own fault. Why hadn't I learned by now? People turned into monsters, at least the people in my experience. First Brazil, then Rand, although Rayad had stayed consistent. What about Valak? Would he transform into one, or had he already? Like Star said, I shouldn't be thinking of him at all, not as a companion, and not to fill the dead place in my heart. As if I could, I laughed. A drunken sound, tattered and ragged, the music of my thoughts. Look around you, Yelena, I chided myself. The poisoned food taster who converses with ghosts. I should be thankful that I breathed, that I existed. I shouldn't long for more than freedom in Sitia. Then I could fill the emptiness, Dismissing all sentimental, weak thoughts, I focused on the business of staying alive. Escaping to Scythia would break no bonds with Valak. Once I obtained the antidote to butterfly's dust, I could set my plans into motion. Determined, I reviewed lock-picking techniques in my mind until I fell asleep in deep alcohol-induced sleep. I woke an hour before dawn with a pounding head. My mouth felt like an abandoned spider web. I imagined dust blowing from my lips with each exhaled breath. Moving with extra care, I inched out of bed. Wrapping my blanket around my shoulders, I went to get a drink. Valak liked cold water and always kept a pitcher outside on the balcony. The crisp night air blew away the lingering fuzziness of sleep. The castle's walls glowed eerily, reflecting the moonlight. I located the metal pitcher. A thin film of ice had formed on the top. Breaking it with a finger, I poured water into my mouth, gulping. When I tipped my head back for a second drink, I noticed a black spider-shaped object clinging to the castle wall above my head. With growing alarm, I realised the shape was descending towards me. It wasn't a spider, but a person. I searched for a hiding spot, but stopped when I realised that the intruder had probably already seen me. Locking myself in the suite and waking Valak seemed a better plan, but before I could enter the pitch-black living room, I hesitated. Inside, the intruder's dark clothes would be hard to see. A locked door no longer gave me a sense of security since my lock-picking lessons with Janko. Cursing myself for leaving my switchblade inside, I moved to the far end of the balcony, clutching the water pitcher in my hand. The wall climber jumped the remaining distance to the balcony floor. The effortless movement triggered recognition. "Valak?" I whispered. A bright flash of white teeth, then Valak removed a pair of dark glasses. The rest of his face was hidden behind a hood that covered his head and was tucked into a skin-tight body leotard. "What are you doing?" I asked. Reconnaissance. The generals tend to stay up late after the commander leaves the brandy meeting, so I had to wait until everyone had gone to bed. Valak went into the suite. He removed his hood. Lighting the lantern on his desk, he pulled a paper from his pocket. "I hate a mystery. I would have let the identity of the commander's successor remain a secret, as I have for 15 years, but tonight's opportunity was too tempting. With 8 drunken generals sleeping it off, I could have danced on their beds without waking them. Not one among them has any imagination. I watched all the generals put their envelopes from the commander right into their briefcases. Valak motioned for me to join him at the desk. "Here, help me decipher this." He handed me a stiff piece of paper. A jumble of words and numbers were scrawled on it. He had copied the 8 different pieces of the encrypted message by stealing into each general's room. I wondered why he was confiding in me. Too curious to question, I pulled up a chair to help him. "How did you break the wax seal?" I asked. "Rookie trick. All you need is a sharp knife and a tiny flame. Now read me the first set of letters." He wrote it down, then reordered the letters until he had created the word siege. Opening a book, he flipped through the pages. Symbols like the ones on my switchblade's handle peppered the document. The page Valak stopped on was decorated with a large blue symbol that resembled a star in the middle of 3 circles. "What's that?" I asked. The old battle symbols for siege. The dead king used these markings to communicate with his captains during times of war. They were originally created hundreds of years ago by a great strategist. "Read me the next set. They should be numbers." I told him the numbers. He began to count the lines of text. It occurred to me that I could borrow this book and figure out Janko's message on my switchblade. Eventually, my ass. Won't Janko be surprised? When Valak reached that number, he wrote a letter down on a clean page. After he had finished deciphering the message, Valak sat as still as held breath. Unable to wait any longer, I asked, "Who is it?" "Guess." I looked at him. I was tired and hungover. "I'll give you a hint." "Who was the happiest about the change? Whose name keeps popping up during the most bizarre situations?" Terror swept over my body like a cloak. If something happened to the commander, Brazil would be in command. I would probably be his first order of business and wouldn't live long enough to see any changes he might implement in Ixia. Valak understood the look on my face. He nodded. "Right, Brazil." For 2 days, the commander met with each general in turn. My brief and periodic interruptions to taste the commander's food created uncomfortable moments of silence. The tension around the castle was palpable as the general's retinue snarled and fought with everyone. On the 3rd day, when I arrived to taste the commander's breakfast, I found him absorbed in conversation with Brazil and advisor Morgan. The commander's eyes were glazed, his voice was monotone. "Get out of here," Brazil barked. Morgan pushed me into the throne room. "Wait here until we summon you," he ordered. I hesitated outside the door, uncertain if I should heed his unusual request. If it had come from Valak or the commander, I wouldn't have doubted, but being expected to follow Morgan's orders rankled. My worries grew as I imagined Brazil attempting an assassination. I was about to search for Valak when he burst into the throne room, his expression hard as he turned towards the commander's office. "What are you doing out here?" Valak demanded. "Haven't you tasted his breakfast yet?" "I was ordered to wait." "He's with Brazil and Morgan." Sudden fear crossed Valak's face. He pushed past me into the office. I followed. Morgan was standing behind the commander with his fingertips pressing into the commander's temples. When Valak appeared, Morgan stepped away. He said smoothly, "You can definitely feel, sir, that this is an excellent way to ease a headache." Animation returned to the commander's face. "Thank you, Morgan," he said. Glaring at Valak's intrusion, he demanded, "What's so important?" "Disturbing news, sir." Valak stared daggers at Brazil and Morgan. "I would like to discuss it in private." The commander rescheduled their meeting for later that day, then dismissed them. Yelena, taste the commander's breakfast now." "Yes, sir." Valak watched me taste the food. An intense expression lined his face, making me nervous. Did he think the food was tainted? I rechecked the cooling tea and lukewarm omelette, but detected no foreign substances. I placed the tray on the commander's desk. "Yelena, if I have to eat cold food again, I'll have you whipped. Understand?" The commander's voice lacked passion, but the threat was genuine. "Yes, sir," I replied, knowing an excuse was useless. You're dismissed. I fled from the office, barely noticing the bustling activity in the throne room. Walking past the entrance, I paused. "Hungry?" said a flat voice in my head. My stomach growled. I was ravenous. I headed towards the kitchen. When I rounded a corner, Advisor Morgan stood there, blocking my path. He linked his arm through mine and guided me to an isolated section of the castle. Going with him seemed natural. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to be afraid, terrified even, but I couldn't produce the emotions. My hunger had dissipated. I felt content. Morgan steered me down a deserted corridor, a dead end, I thought, still unable to conjure a reaction. His silky grey eyes stared at me for a moment before he unhooked his arm from mine. His fingers traced a line of black diamonds down my uniform sleeve. "My Yelena," he said possessively. Fear blazed up my arm and exploded in my chest the second physical contact with Morgan was broken. My emotional ennui had dissolved, but I couldn't move. The muscles in my body wouldn't obey my mind's frantic commands to fight. A magician. Morgan had power. He had used it during the brandy meeting, tipping Valak off, but further contemplation on this revelation was cut short when Morgan stepped closer. "Had I guessed you would cause so much trouble, I never would have brought you to Brazil's orphanage." He smiled at my confusion. "Didn't Rayad tell you that I found you?" "No," my voice was husky. "You were lost in the jungle, only 6 years old. Such a beautiful, bright child, such a delight. I rescued you from the claws of a tree leopard because I knew you had potential. But you were too stubborn, too independent. The harder we tried, the more you resisted." Morgan cupped his hand under my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze. "Even now, when I'm locked into you, you're still fighting me. I can command your body." He raised his left arm, and my own left arm mirrored his movement. "But if I tried to control both your mind and your body, you would eventually thwart me." He shook his head in disbelief, as if the whole concept amazed him. "Fortunately, subtle pressure is all that's required." He pulled his hand away and then made a pinching gesture with his finger and thumb. My throat closed. I was unable to breathe. Powerless to defend myself, I sank to the ground. My mind's screaming went unvoiced. Logic grabbed the panic and wrestled it to the ground. Morgan was using magic. Maybe I could block it before I passed out. I tried reciting poisons in my mind. "Such strength," Morgan said in admiration. "But it won't save you this time." He bent down and kissed me tenderly, almost fatherly, on the forehead. Peace flowed through me. I stopped resisting. My vision blurred. I felt Morgan take my hand, holding it in his own. Chapter 25. Reclining against the wall, I clung to Morgan's hand as the world faded around me. I felt an unwelcome jolt, then the tight blockage in my throat released. Gasping for breath, I came to my senses and realised I was lying prone on the floor. Next to me sat Valak atop Morgan's chest. Valak's hands were wrapped around Morgan's neck, but his eyes were on me. Morgan smiled when Valak stood and yanked him to his feet. "I hope you're aware of the penalty for being a magician in Ixia," Valak said. "If not, I'd be delighted to enlighten you." Morgan smoothed his uniform and adjusted his dark braid of hair. Some would say your ability to resist magic makes you a magician, Valak. The commander thinks otherwise. You're under arrest. Then you're in for a big surprise. I suggest you discuss these false accusations with the commander before you do anything drastic, Morgan said. How about I kill you right now? Valak stepped closer to him. A hot, searing pain stabbed my abdomen. I yelped and rolled into a tight ball. The agony was relentless. Valak took another step. I screamed as fire blazed up my back and encircled my head. Any closer and she'll be a corpse, Morgan said, a cunning sleekness to his voice. Through eyes tearing with anguish, I saw Valak shift his weight to the balls of his feet, but he remained in place. Well now, that's interesting. The old Valak really wouldn't have cared if I killed his food taster. Yelena, my child, I just realised how incredibly useful you are. The intense pain was unbearable. I would have gladly died to escape from it. Before I passed out, my last glimpse of Morgan's back as he walked away unharmed. I woke to blackness. Something heavy pressed against my forehead. Alarmed, I tried to sit up. It's all right, Valak said, pushing me down. I touched my head and pulled off a damp cloth. Blinking in the light, I looked around at the familiar furniture of my own room. Valak stood next to me, a cup in his hand. Drink this. I took a sip and cringed at the medical flavour. Valak insisted I finish it. When the cup was empty, he placed it on the night table. Rest, he ordered, then turned to leave. Valak, I said, stopping him, why didn't you kill Morgan? He considered for a moment, tilting his head. A tactical manoeuvre. Morgan would have killed you before I could finish him. You're the key to too many puzzles. I need you. He strode to the door, but paused at the threshold. His grip on the doorknob was hard enough to whiten his knuckles. I've reported Morgan to the commander, but he was... Valak's hand twisted on the knob and I heard the metal crack. Unconcerned. So I'll be guarding the commander until Brazil and Morgan leave. I've reassigned Ari and Janko as your personal bodyguards. Don't leave this suite without them and stop eating Creolio. I'll taste the commander's Creolio. I want to see if anything happens to you. Valak pulled the door shut, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. True to his word, and much to the commander's annoyance, Valak didn't leave the commander's side. Ari and Janko enjoyed a change in routine, but I made them work hard. Whenever I wasn't tasting the commander's meals, I had Ari drill me with knife defence and Janko give me more lessons on picking locks. The general's departure was scheduled for the next day, which meant it was time to do some of my own reconnaissance. It was early evening and I knew Valak would still be with the commander until late. I told Ari and Janko that I was going to bed early and bade them good night at the threshold to Valak's suite. After waiting an hour, I slipped back into the hallway. The corridors of the castle were not as deserted as I had hoped, but Valak's office was located off the main throughway. I approached his door. Scanning the hallway for activity, seeing no one, I inserted my lockpicks into the first of the 3 keyholes, but my nerves made popping the lock impossible. I took a couple of deep breaths and tried again. I had 2 locks sprung when I heard voices approaching. Standing, I pulled the picks out the keyhole and knocked on the door as 2 men came into view. "He's with the commander," said the guard on the left. "Thanks," I replied and started to walk in the opposite direction, with my heart beating like a hummingbird's wings. I glanced behind me until they were gone. then raced back to Valek's office. The third lock proved to be the most difficult. I was covered with sweat by the time I popped it. I hurried into the room, locking the door behind me. My first task was to open the small wooden cabinet that held my antidote. Perhaps Valek had locked the recipe in there. I lit a dim lantern to peer inside. Glass bottles of various shapes and sizes gleamed in the light. Most of the bottles were marked poison. A growing sense of urgency consumed me as I searched. All I uncovered was a large bottle containing the antidote. I poured only a few drops into a flask I had hidden in my pocket, knowing that Valek would notice if I took too much. After relocking the cabinet, I began a systematic search of Valek's files, starting with the desk drawers. Even though his office was strewn with books and maps, his personal dossiers were well organised. I found files on Marg and the commander and was tempted to read them, but I stayed focused on finding any folder bearing my name or a reference to butterfly's dust. Valek had written many interesting comments about my tasting abilities in my personal file, but there was no mention of the poison or the antidote. When I finished with the desk, I moved to the conference table. Books of poisons were interspersed with files and other espionage documents. I sorted through the piles. My time was running out. I had to be back in Valek's suite before I escorted the commander to his apartment. I suppressed my disappointment as I finished with the table. There was still half of his office left to search. I was halfway across the quiet room when I heard the distinct sound of a key being inserted into the lock. One click, then the key was withdrawn. I snuffed out the lantern as the second lock clicked open. Diving behind the conference table, I hoped the boxes piled underneath would hide me from view. Please, I prayed to the forces of fate, let it be Marg and not Valek. A third click made my heart squeeze. The door opened and closed. A light tread of footsteps crossed the room. Someone sat at the desk. I didn't risk peeking, but I knew it was Valek. Had the commander retired early, I reviewed my meagre options. Be discovered or wait Valek out. I eased into a more comfortable position. A few minutes later, someone knocked on the door. Come, said Valek. Your package has arrived, sir, said a male voice. Bring him in. Valek scraped his chair on the stone floor. I heard the rustle of chains and a shuffling step. You're dismissed, Valek said. The door clicked shut. A familiar rancid smell of the dungeon reached my nose. Well, Tentil, are you aware that you're next in line for the noose? Valek asked. My heart went out to the doomed prisoner. I knew exactly how he felt. Yes, sir, a voice whispered. Pages crackled. You're here because you killed your 3-year-old son with a plough, claiming it was an accident. Is that correct? Valek asked. Yes, sir. My wife had just died. I was unable to afford a nanny. I didn't know he had climbed under. The man's voice was pinched with pain. Tentil, there are no excuses in Ixia. Yes, sir. I know, sir. I want to die, sir. The guilt is too hard to bear. Then dying wouldn't be an adequate punishment, would it? Valek didn't wait for a response. Living would be a harsher sentence. In fact, I know of a profitable farmstead in MD4 that has tragically lost both the farmer and his wife, leaving behind 3 sons under the age of 6. Tentil will hang tomorrow, or so everyone shall believe. But you will be escorted to MD4 to take over the operations of a corn plantation and the job of raising those 3 boys. I suggest your first order of business should be to hire a nanny. Understood? But the code of behaviour has been excellent at ridding Ixia of undesirables, but it is somewhat lacking in basic human compassion. Despite my arguments, the commander fails to grasp this point, so I occasionally take matters into my own hands. Keep your mouth shut and you will live. One of my associates will check on you from time to time. I huddled behind the boxes, frozen in disbelief. Hearing Valak use the word compassion was as incomprehensible to me as the thought of Marg apologising for her rude behaviour. There was another knock at the door. "Come," Valak said. "Perfect timing as always. Wing, did you bring the documents?" I heard a rustle of papers. "Your new identity," Valak said. "I believe our business is concluded. Wing will escort you to MD4. Change clanked on the floor. "You're dismissed." "Yes, sir," Tentel said, his voice cracked. He was probably overwhelmed. I knew how I would feel if Valak offered me a free life. After the men left, a painful quiet descended. I feared the sound of my breath would give me away. Valak's chair scraped. 2 faint thumps were followed by a loud yawn. "So, Yelena, did you find our conversation interesting?" I held still, hoping he was guessing, but his next statement confirmed my dismay. "I know you're behind the table." I stood. There was no anger in his voice. He lounged in his chair with his feet resting on the desk. "How did you—" I began. "You favour lavender soap, and I wouldn't be alive today if I couldn't determine when someone had picked my locks. Assassins love to ambush, leaving dead bodies behind mysteriously locked doors. Fun stuff." Valak yawned again. "You're not angry?" "No. Relieved, actually. I wondered when you would search my office for the recipe of the antidote." Sudden fury welled in my throat. "Relieved? That I might try to escape? That I rifled through your papers? You're that confident that I wouldn't succeed?" Valak cocked his head to one side, considering. "I'm relieved that you're following the standard steps of escaping and not inventing a unique plan. If I know what you're doing, then I can anticipate your next move. If not, I might miss something. Learning how to pick locks naturally leads to this." Valak gestured around the room. "But since the formula has not been written down, and only I know it, I'm confident you won't find it." I balled my hands into fists to keep them from wrapping around Mr. I know everything's superior neck. "Okay, so there's no chance for escape. How about this? You gave Tentel a new life. Why not me? How do you know I haven't already?" Valak put his feet on the floor and leaned forward. "Why do you think you were in the dungeon for almost a year? Was it only luck that you happened to be the next in line when Oskov died? Perhaps I was merely acting out of our first meeting when I seemed so surprised that you were a woman. It was too much to bear. What do you want, Valak?" I demanded. "Do you want me to give up trying? Be content with this poisoned life? Do you really want to know?" Valak's voice intensified. He stood and walked over to me. "Yes, I want you. Not as an unwilling servant, but as a loyal staff member. You're intelligent, quick-thinking, and becoming a decent fighter. I want you to be to be as dedicated as I am at keeping the commander safe. Yes, it's a dangerous job, but on the other hand, on one miscalculated somersault on the tightrope could break your neck. That's what I want. Will you be able to give it to me?" Valak's eyes seared deep into mine, searching for an answer. Besides, where would you go? You belong here. I was tempted to concede, but I knew that if I wasn't poisoned or murdered by Brazil, the wild magic in my blood would eventually explode, taking me with it. The only physical mark I would leave on this world would be a ripple in the power source. Without the antidote, I was lost anyway. I don't know, I said. There's too much. That's... you haven't told me? I nodded, unable to speak. Telling him about my magical abilities, I thought, would only get me killed faster. Trusting is hard. Knowing who to trust, even harder, Valak said. And my track record has been rather horrendous. A weakness of mine. No, a strength. Look at Ari and Janko. They appointed themselves your protectors long before I assigned them, all because you stood up for them to the commander when their own captain wouldn't. Think about what you have right now. Before you give me an answer, you have gained the commander's and Marion's respect and Ari's and Janko's loyalty. What have I earned from you, Valak? Loyalty, respect, trust. You have my attention, but give me what I want and you can have everything. The next morning, the generals prepared to leave. It took 4 hours for 8 retinues to assemble. 4 hours of noise and confusion. When everyone had finally passed through the outer gates, it seemed that the castle breathed a sigh of relief. In the wake of this sudden release of tension, servants and guards milled about. They grouped together in small clumps, taking a break before cleaning the 8 guest suites. It was during this lull of activity that the commander informed the rest of the castle staff that the Citian delegation was scheduled to arrive the next day. His words struck like lightning. A flash of stunned silence was followed by a frenzy of activity as servants dashed off to make the proper preparations. Although happy to see the backs of Morgan and Brazil, I wandered listlessly throughout the castle. I hadn't given Valak his answer. To live, I had to go south, but without the antidote, I wouldn't survive. Dread filled my heart as the reality of my inevitable fate filled my mind. The next day, my presence was required at the special greeting ceremony for the arriving southern delegation. Apprehension about seeing the Citians unsettled my stomach. I felt as if someone was saying, "Yelena, take a good look at what you can't have." Since the throne room had been converted into an office, the only place in the castle suitable for state affairs was the commander's war room. Once again, Valak stood stiffly in his dress uniform on the commander's right side, while I waited behind them. My apprehension turned to awe as I felt the waves of nervous energy pulsing from the high-ranking officials and advisers selected to be a part of the ceremony. When the delegation was announced and invited to enter, I moved to get a better view. The Citians floated into the room, their long, brightly coloured exotic robes draped to the floor, covering their feet, wearing animal masks trimmed with bright plumes of feathers and fur. They stopped before the commander and fanned out into a V. Their leader, wearing a hawk's mask, spoke in formal tones. "We bring you greetings and salutations from your southern neighbours. We hope this meeting will bring our two lands closer together. To show our commitment to this endeavour, We have come prepared to reveal ourselves to you. The speaker and the 4 companions removed their masks in one rehearsed movement. I blinked several times in astonishment, hoping that during the seconds of darkness everything would be set right. Unfortunately, my world had just mutated from bad to wretched. Valak glanced at me with a resigned look as if he too couldn't believe this new turn of events. The Scythian leader was Iris. A master-level magician stood mere 3 feet before Commander Ambrose. Chapter 26. Ixia welcomes you to our land and hopes to make a fresh start, the commander announced to the southern delegation. As I waited behind the commander, I wondered what would happen to the Scythians once Valak informed the commander that Iris was a magician. Contemplating the mischief she might create before leaving the castle, I tried to envision a best-case scenario. I failed, realising this was probably only the beginning of the end. Valak watched thoughtfully as the Southerners and the commander exchanged more formal statements. I guessed from Valak's demeanour that Iris had not used her magic. After the official greeting ceremony concluded, the delegation was guided to their quarters to rest for their journey and to await the evening's feast. Protocol decreed that pleasantries and entertainment preceded hardcore negotiations. Everyone except the commander and Valak filed out of the war room. I started to leave, but Valak grabbed my arm. "Okay, Valak, let's hear it. Some dire warning, I presume?" the commander asked, sighing. "The Scythian leader is a master magician," Valak said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. He probably wasn't used to being sighed at. "That's to be expected. How else could they know we're sincere about creating a trade treaty? We could have ambushed them instead. It's a logical move." Unconcerned, the commander turned toward the door. "She doesn't trouble you?" Valak asked. "She's tried to kill Yelena." The commander looked at me for the first time since we had entered the war room. "It would be unwise to kill my food taster. Such an act could be misinterpreted as an assassination attempt and halt negotiations. Yelena is safe. For now." He shrugged off any more thought of my future safety and left the war room. Valak grimaced. "Damn! Now what?" I asked. He kicked at one of the conference chairs. I anticipated a magician with the southern delegation, but not her. He shook his head as if to clear the frustration that gripped his voice. "I'll leave the Power Twins assigned to you while she's here. Although, if she's determined to get you, there's nothing they or I can do. I looked out with Morgan. I was just around the corner when I felt his power surge. Let's hope she behaves while she's a guest in our land." Valak pushed the chair against the table with a loud bang. "At least I know where all the magicians are. Morgan was one I felt during the General's brandy meeting, and the Southern Master is now in the castle. Unless any more decide to show up, we should be safe." "What about Captain Starr?" I asked. "Starr's a charlatan. Her claims of being a magician are just a tactic for scaring her informers so they don't double-cross her," Valak sighed. "Generals, Scythians, and feasts increase my workload. Which reminds me, you need to stay for the entire feast tonight. A tiresome chore, but at least the food should be good. I've heard Rand wanted to use the Creolio for a new dessert, but the commander refused his request. Another puzzle, since Brazil has been sending the stuff by the wagon load and has promised to ship the dessert to all the other generals, they were clamouring after it like it was gold. I saw a flash in Valak's eyes. Any unusual symptoms, feelings or appetites since you stopped eating the Crelia? It had been 3 days since I had eaten a piece, and I couldn't recall any actual physical symptoms that might be linked to it. Eating it had lifted my spirits and given me a boost of energy. I longed for its sweet taste, especially now that my chances of freedom are dwindling. A mild craving, I told Valak, but nothing like an addiction. I find myself thinking about it from time to time, wishing for a piece. Valak frowned. It might be too soon. The Crelio could still be in your bloodstream. You'll inform me if something happens. Yes. Good. I'll see you tonight. Poor Valak, I thought, stuffed into his dress uniform 3 times in as many days. Elaborate decorations had been hung in the dining room for the feast. Crimson and black drapes hung along the walls, and red and gold streamers twisted and dipped from the ceiling. The room was ablaze with light. An elevated platform had been constructed to support a head table where the southern delegation, the commander and Valak all wore their finest clothes. High-ranking officers and upper-level advisors were seated at round tables circling the room, leaving the middle empty. In the corner, a 12-piece band played sedate music, which was a surprise since the commander frowned at music, considering it was a waste of time. I sat behind Commander Ambrose so he could pass his plate to me. As predicted, the food was marvellous. Rand had outdone himself. My dark uniform blended in with the black drapes along the wall, and since I doubted anyone beyond the dais noticed I was there, I watched the others as I waited between courses. Ari and Jankor sat next to each other at a table by the door, attending their first formal function as captains. They were clearly uncomfortable. Knowing them, I was sure they would rather be drinking beer with their comrades back in the barracks. Iris and her retinue were seated to the commander's left. Their formal robes had swirls of colour and glittering in the firelight. Iris wore a diamond pendant shaped like a flower, which sparkled on her chest. She ignored my presence, which was fine with me. After the servants cleared the meal from the tables, they extinguished half of the lanterns. The band quickened their tempo until a pulsating rhythm vibrated the glassware on the tabletops. Costumed dancers burst into the room, holding blazing staffs high above their heads. Fire dancers. They performed an intricate and complex routine. Watching them whirl and spin to the beat left me gasping for breath. I understood now why their festival tent had been so packed with enthusiastic fans. At one point, Valak leaned back in his chair and said to me, "I don't think I would have made it past the audition, Yelena. I probably would have set my hair on fire by this point." "What's a singed beard for the sake of art?" I teased. He laughed. The mood in the room was energetic and elated. I hoped the commander wouldn't wait 15 more years before having another feast. The dancers finished their second encore and exited the room. Iris rose to offer a toast. The Citians had brought their finest cognac. Iris poured a glass for the commander, Valak and herself. She didn't seem offended when the commander's goblet passed to me. I swirled the amber liquid and inhaled the sharp odour. Taking a small sip, I rolled the cognac around my tongue, then spat onto the floor. Gagging and retching with the effort I tried to expel every last bit of it from my mouth. Valak stared in alarm. I choked out, "My love." Valak knocked the other two glasses, spilling their contents on the table as my body reacted to the poison. I watched Valak turn into a black ink spot, and the walls run with blood. I floated on a crimson sea, colours dancing and swirling around my head. The sound of broken glass raining on stones created an odd melody in my mind. I drifted on a raft made of curly white hair, carried along by a strong current. Iris's soothing voice spoke amid the tempest of colours. "You'll be fine. Just hold on to your life raft. You can ride out this storm." I awoke in my room. A dim lantern had been lit, and Janko sat in a chair reading a book. This was much nicer than the last time I had tasted my love. A soft bed was preferable to lying in a pool of my own vomit, although this habit of waking in my room without knowing how I got here had stopped. "Why, Janko, I didn't know you could read," I teased. My voice was hoarse, my throat sore, and a dull ache resided deep in my head. "I'm a man of many unknown talents," Janko smiled. "Welcome back. How long have I been out? 2 days. What happened?" "After you turned into a madwoman," Janko said. "Or why you turned into one," I grimaced. "After." "It's amazing how fast Valak can move," Janko said with admiration. "He pushed you out of sight onto the floor while corking the tainted bottle and using some sleight of hand to swap it for another. He apologised to everyone about being clumsy and proceeded to pour 3 new glasses so that Southern Witch could make her phony toast. The whole incident was smoothed over so quick that only the people on the dais knew what really happened. Janko scratched at his goatee. "Well, they and Harry. He had his eye on you all night, so when you went down, we were on our way. We slipped behind the head table during the toast and he carried you here. He'd still be here, but I forced him at knife point to get some sleep." "Ah, that explained my curly-haired raft." I sat up. The ache in my head intensified. A water pitcher rested on my night table. I poured a glass, draining it dry. "Valak said you'd be thirsty. He's been here a couple of times, but he's been busy with the Southerners. I can't believe that witch had the audacity to try poison the commander." "She didn't. Remember, she poured 3 glasses from that same bottle. Someone else must have," I said, but the culprit eluded me as the effort of concentrating made my head pound. "Unless she was going for murder-suicide, a quick death instead of waiting in our dungeon to be hanged." "Possible," I said, but I thought it unlikely. "Valak must agree with you. The treaty discussions are proceeding as if nothing happened," Janko yawned. "Well, now that you're coherent again, I'll get some sleep. It's another 4 hours until dawn." Janko pushed me back down on the bed. "Get some rest. We'll be back in the morning." He studied me, indecision creasing his face. "Harry said you screamed and raved a lot while he took care of you. In fact, he said if Rayad was alive today, he'd gut the bastard without a moment's hesitation. I just thought you might want to know." Janko gave me a brotherly kiss on the forehead and left. "Oh, great," I groaned. What else did Harry know? How would I be able to face him in the morning? Well, I thought, nothing I could do about it now. I tried to go back to sleep, but my empty stomach kept growling. All I could think was food, I examined my hunger, trying to deduce if it was a mental command from Iris like Morgan had done to me before, but I couldn't come up with a good reason why she would summon me. Once I had decided to risk the trip, I strapped on my switchblade and made my way on wobbly legs to the kitchen, where I hoped to sneak in and grab some bread before Rand woke up and start his door. Slicing off a chunk of cheese to eat along with my loaf, I was about to leave when Rand's door opened. "Yelena," he said in surprise. "Morning, Rand. Just stealing some food. I haven't seen you in weeks," he grumped. "Where have you been?" He moved toward the ovens, opening the first black metal door. He stoked the embers of the fire and added more coal. "I've been busy, the generals, the delegation, the feast," which, by the way, was magnificent, Rand. "You're a genius." He perked up after I appealed to his ego. I resigned myself to the fact that if I wanted him to think we were still friends, I would have to talk to him. I placed my breakfast on a table and pulled up a stool. Rand limped towards me. "Someone said you were sick." "Yeah, stomach bug. I haven't eaten in 2 days, but I'm better now." I gestured to the bread. "Hold off. I'll make you some sweet cakes." I watched him mix the batter, making sure he didn't slip in a poisonous ingredient, but after the cakes were under my nose, I dug into them with mindless abandon. The familiar scene of Rand making bread while I sat close by dissolved the awkwardness between us. We were soon chatting and laughing. It wasn't until his questions turned pointed and specific that I realised Rand was pumping me for information about the commander and Valak. I clenched my fork, stabbing it hard into my sweet cakes. "Hear anything about the Southern Treaty?" Rand asked. "Nope." My tone was harsh, and he looked at me with curiosity. "Sorry, I'm tired. I better get back to bed." "Before you go, you might as well take these beans along." Rand pulled down the jar. "I've sautéed, ground, even boiled them, but they still taste unrecognisably terrible." He poured them into a bag and went to check on his baking fires. Watching him stir the glowing coals gave me an idea. "Maybe they're not to eat," I said. "Maybe they're a source of fuel." The southern pods had been delivered to Brazil's new factory. Perhaps he was using them to heat his ovens. "Worth a try," Rand said. I threw the beans in the hearth fire. He waited for a while, but there were no sudden flames or increasing temperature. While Rand switched his bread pans, I stared into the embers. Thinking that was as far as the mystery of the beans was concerned, I was out of options. When Rand started again with his questions, I turned my eyes away from the oven's fire. Pressure knotted in my throat. "I'd better get going or Valak will be wondering where I am." "Yes, by all means go. I noticed you and Valak have become close. Tell him for me not to kill anybody, will you?" Sarcasm rendered Rand's voice sharp. I lost control and slammed the oven door shut. It echoed in the quiet kitchen. "At least Valak has the decency to inform me when he's poisoning me," I blurted out, but wished I could pull the words from the air and stuff them back into my mouth. Blaming my fatigue, my anger, or Rand for my outburst wouldn't erase what I had just said. His facial expressions contorted and facilitated from surprise to guilt to anger. "Did Star tell you?" he demanded. I was at a loss. If I said yes, he would find out from Star that I was lying, and if I said no, he would insist on knowing my source. Either way, he'd figure it out. I had just revealed Valek's entire undercover operation. Unfortunately, Rand didn't wait for me to answer before launching into a tirade. I should have known she would tell you. She loves to play nasty head games. When you came along, I didn't want to know you. All I wanted was the heap of gold credit that Star offered to apply to my debt if I spiked Valek's test. Rand pounded the table. Then my damned morals and your damn niceness complicated things, selling information about you, then having to protect you without looking like I was protecting you, made my life hell. Sorry for the inconvenience, I said. I guess I should be grateful, poisonings and kidnappings aside. Sarcasm sharpened my voice. Rand rubbed his hands over his face. His anger had dissipated. I'm sorry, Elena. I was backed into a corner and I couldn't get out without hurting someone. I softened. Why did Star want me poisoned? General Brazil commissioned her. That shouldn't be a surprise. No, I thought for a moment and then asked, Rand, is there anyone who can help you get out of this mess? Maybe Valek? Absolutely not. Why do you have such an elevated opinion of him? He's a murderer. You should hate him just for giving you butterflies dust. I would. Who told you? I demanded. Who else knows? I thought only the commander and Valek knew. Your predecessor, Oskov, told me why he never tried to run, and no, I haven't sold that information to anyone. I do have limits. He tugged at his apron. Oskov's hatred of Valek rivaled my own, and I understood that. But your relationship with Valek, Rand's furrowed brow spiked up towards his forehead. You're in love with him, he cried. That's preposterous, I shouted. We gaped at each other, too stunned to say anything more. Then a sweet, nutty aroma reached my nose. Rand too sniffed the air. I followed the scent to the oven where I had tossed the mystery beans into the fire. Opening the door, I was greeted by a strong puff of heavenly scent. Crelio.
Chapter 27. Where did you find those beans? Rand asked. They're the missing ingredient to the Crelio recipe. I didn't think of roasting them to change the flavour. A storeroom downstairs, I lied. I wasn't about to tell him that Valek and I had intercepted them on the way to Brazil's new factory, which I now realised was probably not producing feed but manufacturing Crelio. Which storeroom? Rand asked, a hint of desperation in his voice. I don't remember. Try harder. If I can duplicate Ving's recipe for Crelio, then maybe I won't be transferred. Transferred? Where? You mean Valek hasn't gloated over it by now? He's wanted to get rid of me since the takeover. I'm being sent to Brazil's manor house, and Ving will be coming here. He won't last a week. Rand spat the words out with bitter force. When? I don't know. I haven't gotten my transfer papers yet. So there's some hope to stop it, if you can find me those beans. He thinks we're still friends, I realised in amazement, even after admitting to poisoning me and accusing me of loving his enemy. He believes I'll do it for him. I had no response. I stalled. I'll try, I said, then made a hasty exit. The first flicker of dawn was cresting the Sol Mountains. As I arrived at Valek's suite unseen, the tall windows in the living room faced east, and in the weak grey light I saw Valek's profile as he sat on the couch waiting for me. Back so soon? He asked. Too bad. I was just about to organise a search for your dead body. What happened when you knocked on the Southerner magician's door to sacrifice yourself? Did they kick you out, thinking you too half-witted to waste their time on? I plopped on a chair to wait out Valek's sarcastic lecture. No excuse I could offer would satisfy him. He was right. Going out alone had been a foolish thing to do, but logic and an empty stomach were like oil and water. They didn't mix. When he was quiet, I asked, "Are you done?" "What? No rebuttal?" I shook my head. "Then I'm finished." "Good," I said. "Since you're already in a bad mood, I might as well tell you what happened while I was in the kitchen. Actually, two things. One bad, one good. Which would you like to hear first?" "The bad," Valak answered. "That allows me the hope that the good will balance things out." I braced myself and admitted to revealing his undercover operation. Valak's face hardened. "It's your fault. I was defending you," I blurted out. He paused. "In protecting my honour, you exposed months of work. I should be flattered." "You should," I said. I wasn't about to feel guilty. If he hadn't tested my loyalty with Starr and then used me to further his investigation, he wouldn't be in this situation. His shoulders drooped as he leaned back on the couch, kneading his temples. "I hadn't planned on making arrests till later this month. Better implement the clean-up plan before Rand has a chance to alert Starr." Valak rubbed his eyes. "Still, this might be a benefit. I think Starr's becoming suspicious. She hasn't been conducting any illicit business in her office. If I bring her in now, I might discover who hired her to poison the Citian's bottle." "Starr? How?" "She has a southern assassin in her employ. He would be the only one with the skill and the opportunity. I'm sure the poisoning wasn't a result of Starr's personal political views. Her organisation would do anything for anybody for the right price. I must find out who would risk so much to compromise the delegation." He stood up, energised. "What's the good news?" "The mystery beans are an ingredient in making Creolio." "Then why did Brazil lie on his permit application?" "There's no law against manufacturing a dessert," Valak said, matching my leap of logic and about the true nature of Brazil's factory. "Perhaps because the beans are imported from Sitia," I theorised. "That would be illegal, at least until the trade treaty is finalised. Maybe Brazil's been using our other southern ingredients or equipment as well." "Possible, which is why he was so eager to have the treaty. You'll have to take a good look around when you visit the factory." "What?" "The commander has scheduled a trip to MD5 when the Southerners leave, and where the commander goes, you go." "What about you? You're going too, aren't you?" The panic welling in my throat made my voice squeak. "No, I've been ordered to stay here." 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 5. Keep fighting like this and you will die, Janko sang. I was pinned against the wall, my bow clattered to the floor, and Janko's staff tapped my temple, emphasising his point. "What's wrong? You're really this easy to beat?" Janko leaned on his bow. "Too distracted," I said. It was only a day ago that Valak had informed me of the commander's plans. "Then what are we doing here?" Ari asked. He and Marion had watched the match, still uncomfortable about what he might have heard when I was delusional. I had a hard time meeting Ari's gaze. "Next round, I'll try harder," I said as Janko and I caught our breath. Reviewing our fight, I asked Janko, "Why do you rhyme when you fight?" "It helps keep me in rhythm." "Don't the other soldiers give you a hard time about it?" "Not when I beat them." We started another match. I made an effort to concentrate, but I was beaten again. "Now you're trying too hard. I can see you planning each offensive move," Janko said. You're giving yourself away, and I'm there for the block before you even strike. Harry added, we drill for a reason. Offensive and defensive moves must be instinctive. Let your mind relax, but stay alert. Block out all distractions. Stay focused on your opponent, but not too focused. That's a contradiction, I cried in frustration. It works, was all Harry said. I took a couple of deep breaths and cleared the distressing thoughts of my upcoming trip to Brazil's district from my mind. Rubbing my hands along the bow, I concentrated instead on the smooth solidness of the weapon. I hefted it in my grip, trying to make a connection, creating an extension of my thoughts through the bow. A light vibration tingled through my fingers as I traced the wood grain. My consciousness flowed through the bow, twisting and turning along the grain, and back along my arm. I possessed the bow and my body at the same time. I moved into the third round with a sense of heightened awareness. Intuitively, I knew what Janko was planning. A split second before he moved, I had my bow up to block. Instead of scrambling to defend myself, I had more time to counter as well as block. I pushed Janko back. A beat of music pulsed in my mind, and I allowed it to guide my attack. I won the match. Amazing! Janko shouted. Did you follow Harry's advice? To the letter. Can you do it again? Harry asked. I don't know. Try me. Try me. Harry snatched his bow and assumed a fighting stance. I rubbed my fingers along the bow's wooden grain, setting my mind back into its previous mental zone. It was easier the second time. Harry was a bigger opponent than Janko. What he lacked in speed, he made up for in strength. I had to modify my defence by dodging his strikes, or he would have knocked me off my feet. Using my smaller size to duck under one of his blows, I swept my bow behind his ankles and yanked. He dropped like a sack of cornmeal. I had won again. Unbelievable, Janko said. My turn, Marion challenged. Again, I tuned into that mental zone. Marion's attacks were panther quick. She favoured the fake jab to the face, which usually lured my guard up and away from protecting my torso, leaving it exposed for a body strike. This time I was one step ahead of her, ignoring the fake and blocking the blow. A clever opponent, she applied tactics instead of speed or strength. She charged me, and I knew she planned to move to my side when I stepped up to engage her. Instead of moving up, I spun and tripped her with my bow. Pouncing on her prone form, I pressed my staff against her neck until she conceded the match. Damn, she said. When a student starts beating her teacher, it means she doesn't need her anymore. I'm walking. Marion strode from the room. Harry and Janko and I looked at each other. She's kidding, right? I asked. Blow to her ego. She'll get over it, Harry said, unless you start beating her every time you fight. Unlikely, I said. Very, huffed Janko, who was probably nursing his own bruised ego. That's enough fighting, Harry said. Yelena, why don't you do some katas to cool down and we'll quit for the day. A kata was a fixed routine of different defensive and offensive blocks and strikes. Each kata had a name, and they grew more complex with each skill level. I started with a simple defensive bow kata. As I moved to watch Harry and Janko become absorbed in conversation, I smiled, thinking that they bickered like an old married couple, and then concentrated on my kata. I practiced finding my mental fighting zone, sliding into and out of it while I performed the appropriate kata moves. Panting, I finished the routine and noticed Iris watching me from the doorway with great interest. She was wearing her hawk mistress uniform. Her hair had been tied back in accordance to Ixia's military regulations. She had probably walked through the castle unchallenged. I glanced towards my bodyguards. They were engrossed in their conversation, ignoring Iris and me. Uneasiness rolled in my stomach. I inched closer to my companions as she came into the room. "Won't Valak send you magic?" I asked her, gesturing to Janko and Ari. "He's on the other side of the castle," she said as she stepped nearer. "But I did feel someone pulling power before we arrived. 2 brief surges, so there is, or was, another magician in the castle." "Wouldn't you know?" I asked in alarm. "Unfortunately, no." "But you know who it is, right?" She shook her head. "There are several magicians that have disappeared. They're either dead or hiding, and some keep to themselves, and we never know about them. It could be anyone. I can only identify a magician if I have established a link with him or her, as I have linked with you." Iris examined the weapons lined against the wall. "What's wrong with the commander?" she asked. "His thoughts are practically dripping out of his head. He's so open I could go in and extract any information I wanted if it weren't against our moral code of ethics." I couldn't answer her. "What are you doing here?" I asked instead. Iris smiled. She gestured to the bow in my hand. "What were you doing with that weapon?" Seeing no reason to lie, I explained about my training. "How did you do today?" she asked. "I beat all 3 opponents for the first time." "Interesting." Iris seemed pleased. I glanced over at Ari and Janko, who were still involved in their conversation. "Why are you here?" I asked again. "You promised me a year." Then I had a sudden horrific thought. Am I closer to Flameout? "There's still time. You've stabilised for now, but how close are you to coming to sit here? The antidote is beyond my reach, unless you can steal the information from Valak's mind." She frowned. "Impossible, but my healers say if you can filch enough antidote to last a month, there's a possibility we can remove the poison from your body. Come with us when we leave. I have an advisor, just your size. She'll wear your uniform and lure Valak and his men away while you take her place. With a mask on, no one would know." Iris spoke with assurance. She was either unconcerned or unaware of the risks. Hope bloomed in my chest. My heart raced. I had to calm myself with a cold reminder that Iris had said there was a possibility of removing the poison. In other words, no guarantees. The escape plan appeared straightforward, but I searched for loopholes anyway. I knew better than to fully trust her. Deciding, I said, "Advisor Morgan was here last week. Is he one of your spies?" Morgan. She turned the name over her tongue. "Tall with grey eyes and wears his long black hair in a single braid." I formed a picture of him in my mind. Valak said he has power. Kangam? How unoriginal. He dropped from sight 10 years ago. There was a big scandal about his alleged involvement with some kidnapping ring. "Oh." Iris inhaled sharply and studied my face. Giving her head a tight shake, she asked with keen interest, "So where has he been hiding?" "MD5. Is he wanted?" "Only if he becomes a danger to Sitia." "But that explains why we've been picking up occasional flares of magic from that district." She cocked her head as if straining to hear some faint music. "There is a faint flow of magic to the castle. It could be from Kangam, Morgan. Although it's highly unlikely, he doesn't have that kind of strength. It's probably just a tiny ripple in the power source, like a loop of thread hanging down. It happens from time to time. But I did feel someone pulling power recently. She paused, staring at me with her direct emerald gaze. Are you coming with me? Mokgan's magic might not concern her, but it concerned me. There seemed to be a link between Mokgan's magic and the commander's unusual behaviour, but I couldn't quite grasp the reason why. Undecided, I rolled it around my mind, much as I moved food in my mouth, tasting for danger. Running away had always been an automatic defensive move, and going south offered my best chance for survival. Months ago, I would have jumped at the offer, but now I felt as if I would be abandoning ship too soon, that there was a remedy yet to be discovered. No, I said, not yet. Are you crazy? Probably, but I need to finish something first. Then I'll keep my promise and come to Sitia, if you're still alive. Maybe you can help me. Is there some way I can shield my mind from magical influence? Iris cocked her head. You're worried about Kangam? Very. I think so. You're strong enough to handle it. She handed me the bow. Do one of your katas, eyes closed, and clear your mind. I started a blocking bow kata. Imagine one brick. Place the brick on the ground and then make a row of them. Use imaginary mortar. Build another row. Keep building until you have a wall as high as your head. I did as instructed and heard a distinct tone as each brick was laid. A wall formed in my mind. Stop, she ordered. Open your eyes. My wall disappeared. Now block me. Loud music vibrated in my head, overwhelming me. Imagine your wall, Iris shouted. My brick defence flashed complete in my mind. The music stopped mid-note. Very good. I suggest you finish your business and escape south. With that kind of strength, if you don't achieve complete control of your magic, someone else might grab it and use it, leaving you a mindless slave. Annoyance quirked her face as she spun on her heel and left the training room. The moment the door clicked into place, Ari and Janko ended their conversation and blinked as if they had just woken from a deep sleep. Done already? How many katas? Ari asked. I laughed and put my bow away. Come on, I'm hungry. When the Sitian delegation left 3 days later, I had a sudden panic attack. What the hell was I doing? My one perfect opportunity for escape had slipped away to the south, while I remained behind, preparing to leave for Basil's manor. Iris had been right. I was crazy. My breath hitched every time I thought of the trip. The commander's retinue was scheduled to depart in the morning. I rushed around the castle, packing my own special provisions for the journey. Delana's sorrowful face greeted me when I stopped by her room for some travelling clothes. Rand's paperwork had been finalised, she said. He was coming with us. I requested a transfer, but I doubt I'll be approved, Delana said as she searched through her pile of clothing. If only the lout had married me, then we wouldn't be in this predicament. There's still time to submit the application. If it's approved, you can travel to MD5 for the wedding. He doesn't want to let anyone know how much he cares for me. He's worried that my safety might be used as leverage against him. She shook her head, refusing to be cheered even when I told her that the new trade treaty with Sitia would allow silk to be imported. The Southern Treaty was a simple exchange of goods. Specific items were listed. Only merchants with the proper permits and licenses would be able to buy and sell these items at a fixed price. All caravans would be subject to inspection when crossing the Ixian border at the approved locations. Rand's cup of coffee was only a few months away, but I doubted he would brew some for me since I hadn't spoken to him since our argument in the kitchen. I wouldn't get him more beans, and I couldn't. I couldn't get him more beans, and I couldn't explain why. The morning of our departure was grey and overcast, hinting at snow. The cold season was beginning, which usually indicated the end of travel, not the onset of it. The snows would most likely keep the commander's retinue at Brazil's until the thawing season. I shuddered at the thought. Valak stopped me before I left our suite. This is a very dangerous trip for you. Maintain a low profile and keep your eyes open. Question thoughts in your mind. They might not be your own. He handed me a silver flask. The commander has your daily dose of antidote, but if he forgets to give it to you, here's a backup supply. Tell no one that you have it and keep it hidden. For the first time, Valak trusted me. The metal flask felt warm in my hands. Thanks. A feather of fear brushed my stomach as I packed the flask into my backpack. Another danger I hadn't recognised. What else had I missed? Wait, Yelena, there's one more thing. Valak's manner and tone was strangely stiff and formal. I want you to have this. He extended his hand. On his palm sat the beautiful butterfly he had carved. Silver spots on the wings glinted in the sunlight, and a silver chain hung from a small hole drilled into its body. Valak looped the necklace around my neck. When I carved this statue, I was thinking about you. Delicate in appearance, but with a strength unnoticed at first glance. His eyes met mine. My chest felt tight. Valak acted as if he would never see me again. His fear for my safety seemed genuine, but was he worried about me or his precious food taster?
So thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video. These are the 4 yarns that we plied, and the one Shetland that you saw spinning and being plied. I will be getting uploaded the next version, hopefully the first week into the 100 Days Knitting Challenge. Anyway, off that, no matter where you are in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, or night time, I want you to do what you love doing. Love and hugs to all you fantastic people out there, and I'll definitely see you all again very soon. Goodbye, my beautifuls. Mwah.